Okay, so welcome to ParaMOOC 2023. And the official name of the course is Parapsychology Research and Education, Apparitions, Hauntings, and Poltergeists. February 27th was when we started the live sessions, and March 31st is not the end, but it is the closing session, and the following day we'll have another Zoom discussion forum. I would like to thank, first, don't worry about it. The doorbell is ringing, but that's a good thing. So I hope you enjoyed that little noise. I love it. I want to say thank you to Brian Williams and Natasha Chistis. Brian is from the Psychical Research Foundation and Natasha from Chisfilm, both of them in Albuquerque. I didn't change the splash page, and so I'm missing the beautiful face of Anastasia Damalas from the PF. But I would like to thank her and Lizette Coley for their support since 2015, when my late husband Carlos Alvarado and I started the first ParaMOOC. We couldn't do it without them. So today we have Pamela Ray Heath from Alameda in California. Her talk is How Mind-Matter Interaction May Play a Role in Creating Place Memory. And today is March 20th. Pamela has an MD from the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston and a PsyD specializing in parapsychology from the American School of Professional Psychology and Rosebridge Graduate School of Integrated Psychology. She's a member of the Parapsychological Association and the Society for Psychical Research and has appeared on numerous radio and TV shows. Her current books include Suicide: What Really Happens in the Afterlife, Handbook to the Afterlife, and Mind-Matter Interaction, Historical Reports, Theory, and Research. For more information, you can see her website at pamelaheath.com. Today, this is her abstract. Pamela says, parapsychologists have long been aware that the environment can sometimes appear to hold the memory of past events, which can be known or re-experienced later by those who are sensitive to such information. A review of the literature reveals that place memory originating events tend to fall into one of two very different categories. One category is a low emotion event that gets repeated over many years or centuries. The other appears to originate from a one-time emotionally charged event. This latter category is particularly interesting, as it would seem to have all of the experiential constituents we see in spontaneous mind-matter interaction. This talk will include a general environment in place memory.
Okay, so this is the title slide, the possible role of mind-matter interaction in place memory. And I want to start with a little thank you to all the ghost hunters out there. My original area of focus was mind-matter interaction, and I did my dissertation on what the experience was like for those who did it, including how that experience changed as performers shifted from doing spontaneous events to intentional ones, which kind of gave me the perfect background to understand what might be going on here. But I really enjoyed speaking at ghost hunter conventions, hearing their experiences and answering their often excellent questions. And it's thanks to them that I later became interested in place memory and the afterlife. And the place memory articles I published and the book both grew from that experience. So this is part of why I encourage parapsychologists and ghost hunters to spend time together, because they can spark things. I also want to take a moment while we're waiting for other people to join, if they want to talk about definitions and why they matter. One of the oldest terms you'll see is telekinesis, or TK. And if you're reading the older literature or older books, you will see it. It translates to distant movement. Psychokinesis is still a commonly used term. It translates to mind-soul movement. Mind over matter, you heard Lloyd use the other day. It's a newer phrase. It implies that the mind controls the process over matter. I use mind-matter interaction, or MMI, and this is a mouthful. No one wants to use it. I understand, but it is the most accurate, inclusive term for these events because movement isn't always involved. So anything that has kinesis in the term is going to be Sometimes it's going to be accurate, sometimes it's not. So if you're looking at fire immunity, for example, or inertia, where somebody can live for years without eating or drinking, or luminosity, where a figure emits light, it doesn't seem to involve movement. So we need a more accurate term. Mind over matter is closer, but the problem is, what I found in MMI is the mind is sometimes lending itself to a cooperative process and not really in control. Now, the problem as I see it with inaccurate terms is they can limit your way of thinking about or understanding physical phenomena in subtle and unhelpful ways. And I think most people don't even realize that they are including unconscious assumptions about what they're looking at when they use an inaccurate term. So let's talk about another term, place memory, what it is. If you read the older literature, as I have, you will see that the term place memory has changed in meaning a lot over the years. Because when you look at someone like Harry Price, he thought you had memories that could actually detach from consciousness and get stuck in places. And I think that's what he meant when he talked about place memory. But the way we mean it today is it's information recorded by the living that is stored long-term in the environment, which can later be viewed, heard, tasted, smelled, felt, or known by those with sufficient sensitivity to interpret it. Now, it's important to understand place memory is not the same as retrocognition. And I mention this because, again, if you go back and read the older literature, those two terms are often confused. But retrocognition and place memory, while both place-oriented, differ in three ways. Those who experience place memory typically describe it as a far less intense experience than retrocognition. It's more often kind of a knowing than a reliving or cinematic vision of the past. With place memory, both the percipient and the information they're receiving are thought to exist in the same present time period, which may not be the case with retrocognition, which is thought to be more something that might occur in time slips, or if you use your consciousness to go back in time and actually see what's going on in the past. There's also little, if any, alteration in your state of consciousness with place memory, as opposed to the dreamlike state, altered sensory modalities, and altered sense of time associated with retrocognition. Why does this matter? Because people who do a lot of work with place memory sometimes do get these confused, and you need to be able to recognize which category is being described. Are they talking about retrocognition? Are they talking about place memory if you're going to be doing research on this? One of the things I find really interesting is how well accepted place memory is by the general public. You'll run into a lot of people who will argue till they're dead about the existence of ghosts. The notion that under the right conditions, locations can hold impressions of the people, places, and events that occurred there is extremely well accepted. And I mean, not just by realtors. I have never run into anybody who I didn't ask, have you ever gone into a room and you didn't know why, but you just knew there'd been a fight there a little earlier? Everybody's always said yes. So this is something that's very widely experienced. And because of that, it's widely accepted, unlike some of the phenomena we look at. How is it read? Well, we think usually ESP, but it can be caught on physical recordings. And some have tried using electricity to convert place memory sounds into audible ones that can be recorded. It's also possible consciousness may be able to make place memory audible. This might be mind-matter interaction itself and show up on digital recordings. But the fact that electricity might be able to elicit it suggests there could be a physical aspect to place memory that is not just a psychic phenomenon. How does place memory exist? Short answer, we don't know. We don't know how it's created, how it's stored, but our best guesses at the present suggest that it's more of a passive process of the information being printed on the environment than it is the environment actively recording what's going on. Now, Lloyd used this phrase, and I always liked it a lot. Place memory is a case of being haunted by the living, not haunted by the dead, because those who created place memory may still be alive when others view it. And I have a story about that later. It comes from someone I met at the Waikato Caves Hotel, which you're looking at right now, a beautiful place. It also means, since the living record it to begin with, you can also record over it if you want to change the feel of a place. So what are the basics? If I'm going to get down to the place memory bare bones basics. Well, it was described by the earliest investigators. And if you're reading early stuff by like Sir Oliver Lodge, the descriptions are dead on accurate for place memory as it's seen today. So we know that it's been around a long time. We also know it can exist as multiple discrete layers. It could factor into 90% or more of hauntings. We have a picture of Larnach Castle in New Zealand, which is haunted and also has place memory. The dead, I don't believe, are directly responsible for place memory, but they can indirectly trigger the living to create it, especially if they scare the living. It's present-day information about past events. So that's how it's so different from retrocognition, where it would be going back in time to get current information about event long ago. So they're kind of inverse. Now you might ask, why isn't such a widespread and well-accepted phenomena more investigated? Well, there's three good reasons. Place memory is essentially a subjective experiential event that's perceived within the brain. And even if there are objective environmental variables that can be measured, like geomagnetic fields, they don't really get at the heart of the experience. And finally, place memory is difficult, if not impossible, to isolate for study. The experimenter first has to rule out all the normal causes for the experience, plus paranormal ones as well, and that includes experimenter effect issues. Let's take a brief look at some of the place memory theories that preceded mine, so you could know what I was sort of looking at the time I did my own theory. So Bill Roll's psi field theory. This is Bill Roll on the right there. I like this picture at the PA because it just kind of gives you a sense what a real sweetheart he was. He was a very kind man, as well as knowing an awful lot about the field. And psi fields was not a new concept at the time that he created his theory. There had been a lot of different psi fields postulated, all meaning different things, which can be a problem you get in parapsychology. But the way he meant a psi field was a region of space in which the psi phenomena are detectable. And he felt that psi fields could be held by both the living and non-living objects. But living or animate psi fields could be free, while inanimate ones were bound. And a lot of his theory is focused on psychometry, but it also sort of spread out into other aspects of parapsychology, as we'll see. He felt that psi fields could interact and create what he called representations of themselves that they transmitted to other psi fields, including to objects, which is how you get psychometry, but also animate psi fields. So two living people, each with their own psi fields who interacted, were easier to do, and that would be telepathy. He felt that frequency and proximity would improve the efficiency of communication between psi fields, that the exchange followed the conservation of energy, so energy neither created nor destroyed, it would be just shifted from one psi field to another. He also noted that a passive residue of energy left behind from repeated actions could create what I call the non-emotional place memory. And place memory could be played back depending on the right conditions or any time if someone was gifted enough. And he postulated that long distance effects involved intermediary psi fields. So each psi field didn't go necessarily very far, but they could link all together to give you a long distance effect. And while some of the findings he had, such as the frequency, proximity, that kind of thing, still seem to hold, no one's ever been able to document the existence of a psi field of any kind, that I know of at least. So that's the problem with his theory. Now, Persinger and Coran had their theory of place memory, which was about geomagnetic fields recording events like creating a hologram. And I will not read this whole paragraph, But basically, it's where local geomagnetic activity is the working in the reference beams, and they interact with the static local geomagnetic field, depending on the composition of the Earth and the different local rocks and all this stuff, and that it would work to create the place memory. The biggest problem with this is that it doesn't explain little objects holding detailed information as we see in psychometry. The plus side is it is emphasizing geomagnetic fields do seem to have a role, and so does the local geology and weather sometimes, seasons. Now, how I got involved in this, given that this was not my area of expertise, I spoke at a lot of ghost hunter conventions, and I really enjoyed them, and I'd listen to the other speakers to learn what was being said, and over again, the audience would ask great questions and be incorrectly told, we don't have an answer for that. When we did, it drove me nuts, really, seriously nuts. So the lack of awareness of how our understanding of the paranormal has evolved over time meant that I saw people, and I mean parapsychologists, not just ghost hunters, keep wasting time and energy reinventing the wheel. So I decided I'd try and help fill that void by doing some summaries of the literature. So I went back to the earliest journal articles in the online parapsychology library, which I can't recommend enough, and started back in the 1800s and started reading everything I could find and taking notes. And my plan was simply to write an article on place memory that I could share with others, which I ultimately did. But I found that studying the place memory literature came with a little surprise. There were two very different types of originating events that were getting recorded. It wasn't all the same. So we have our little minion here walking around, boring, just repetitive action, no particular emotion. And if you look back, whoop, there's a knife. This guy's about to get stabbed in the back by the shadow. We have crisis events, high emotion events. So to summarize, the type 1 were low emotion events or everyday actions that got repeated over very long time periods. Lloyd always used the example of the Scottish bagpiper walking the ramparts of the castle. Type 2, highly emotional events that typically involve a person or group in crisis or experiencing a traumatic event. Unlike the other type of place memory, it only needs to occur once to become strongly imprinted in the environment. For example, you're looking at a picture of Alcatraz where Al Capone got shoofed. And it was kind of interesting because we had a tour guide with us who had never told anyone about this story. She knew about it, but when Chris Fleming picked up on it, she confirmed he was right, that this was the location where it happened. Examples include murders, life or death battles, mass casualty, terrorist attacks. So for me, having used phenomenology to study the experiences of those who do mind-matter interaction and seeing how their experiences changed as they moved from doing spontaneous events to intentional ones, I was not only very well grounded in the differences between those experiences, but the fact that differences in originating place memory events had to be meaningful. And I don't know that people had really noticed that or paid attention to it much before. So this raised the question whether there could be two different methods for creating place memory, one active, one passive, which then shared the same storage mechanism in the environment. And with this thought in mind, I had to ask, well, how would it work? And I tried to look at what clues we had. So there's some indication. Can you see me?
We can see your slides. Yeah.
Okay. So hopefully you heard the part with the lightning storm going on where it talked about weather, geomagnetic fields, season can all impact either the storage or retrieval of place memory. Another clue that we have about place memory is based on the fact that it can be erased, disrupted, or covered over. And in the old days, when everyone had videotapes, it was not uncommon to have a videotape eraser, which put out a high magnetic field and which did seem to erase place memory. The problem was, of course, that your cord would not reach very far. So depending on where you were, it wasn't necessarily effective. You can also record over place memory. Since the living record it to begin with, you can also record over it with something that you like a happy party. You can remodel and paint. Sometimes that disrupts it, sometimes not. And of course, you can use focused consciousness, especially as intentional mind-matter interaction, to get rid of it. Now, I was also looking for clues as to how it could be stored in the environment in a normal way, no psi field needed. And I stumbled across the findings of homeopathy, and it brought up the question, could resonance on the quantum level be the answer to how place memory was stored? Now, there's been a lot of surprisingly good homeopathy research that's shown that water molecules are capable of changing shape to form geometric structures that can hold information for long periods of time, remain stable with evaporation, and can even maintain their shape when heated up to 121 degrees centigrade. Water also has magnetic properties that allow it to be influenced by the Earth's geomagnetic field. And this is particularly interesting given that these fields appear to be able to influence place memory. And although water makes up the vast proportion of this planet and the life on it, other types of molecules may also be able to store information in their structural configurations. And that does appear to be the case, although we haven't figured out all of those molecules yet. So homeopathy may serve as an example for how place memory could be passively imprinted on the environment as a kind of resonance. I don't know how many of you know how homeopathy works, but basically you start with an active ingredient, you dilute it with water, you shake it up together, you dilute it again, shake it up, dilute it, shake it, till you get to the point where there is none of the active ingredient left in the water. It's only water, 100% water. And the information that was recorded in that water from the active source ingredient, facilitated by the energy of shaking in the case of homeopathy, sunlight in the case of aromatherapy. And yet, despite the fact it's only water with the information left over from being shaken up with the active ingredient, it still can be effective. There's some, not so much for aromatherapy, but for homeopathy, there does seem to be some good research that it does have some effectiveness. And this whole idea of quantum storage is something that is so much more accepted now than it was 20 years ago. We now realize tremendous amounts of information can be held and transferred on the quantum level. And not only has nanotechnology become mainstream, but we also have a deeper understanding of the use of light photons to communicate information within the body itself. I mean, a single photon of light is part of the nervous system communication system. So place memory could likewise be stored on a physical level through the structure of the environment's molecules and electronic cloud configurations. And this would be compatible with known or suspected variables in place memory, such as humidity, magnetic fields, that kind of thing. And it'd be no different than other forms of energetic data, which could be retrieved without ESP and be capable of holding complex long-term information. I think the fact that it could be physical is really important to us because it suggests that we have ways we should be able to study and prove it. So to sort of summarize my theory of place memory that I came up with, first, the place memory is constantly being imprinted on the environment through resonance. Second, that there may be two types of place memory creation. What I call the passive, with low emotion events that require a lot of repetition to be able to stand out, so that you notice them. Active would be with high emotion events that involve mind-matter interaction and may require only a single event to be obvious to those trying to read it. Finally, that all place memory, regardless of type, is stored on a quantum physical level through the structure of the environment's molecules and their electron clouds. So to recap, we've got the information being transferred from the living to the environment through molecular resonance all the time. But who would notice it? I mean, if it's a low emotion event, it's all going to sort of blend together into this sort of white noise situation. So it would require a lot of repetition to become strong enough to be noticed and read, unless you have a spontaneous MMI fueled by high levels of emotion that accelerate the power and speed of any information transfer, such that a single event is enough to create a vivid imprint. Now, I want to point something out. The truth is likely a spectrum. you aren't going to have just no emotion events or just emotion events. It's going to be a gradient. And it's hard to say at this point. I certainly couldn't tell you whether emotion itself has enough energy to give that oomph for place memory, that it's more noticeable to people, or if it has to have a bit of mind-matter interaction to really imprint strongly. We don't know. But just be aware there's probably a spectrum. You're going to be looking at less emotional versus more emotional. Is this compatible with earlier theories? Well, it certainly seems so, at least with the type 1 of low-level energetic imprint. Needs to be strengthened through repetition, can be influenced by both the local magnetic fields and the weather. So it would fit with Bill Roll's psi field theories, need for proximity, frequency, and recency in place memory. And it would also fit with Persinger and Coran's theory on the influence and recording of place memory based on the geology and the geomagnetic fields. The involvement of spontaneous mind-matter interaction would also better explain some of the really high-impact place memory that comes along with trauma, and why place memory occurs in some crisis situations but not others, since the talent and needs of those imprinting it would vary. So ways to test this theory. I think Brian's going to go into perhaps more detailed and better ways tomorrow. I originally proposed a series of formal experiments to measure the electron structure of test objects or water before and after place memory creation, using a variety of different pieces of equipment, electron spectrometers and UV and stuff. But it faced a lot of hurdles: expense, getting the right equipment, expert analysis of the molecular data, gifted psychics to read and maybe imprint the place memory, and of course, the always present experimenter effect. But it occurred to me that there was a more cost-effective way to at least evaluate whether or not mind-matter interaction could even be involved. And that would be by using phenomenology. And we can look at it from a lot of different angles. Now, this is not going to prove anything. It's going to just, what I was hoping for is it could disprove it. That's what we're always looking for. Can a theory be disproven? So I wanted to look at what people who created place memory said about their experiences, because I thought, okay, if their experiences were completely incompatible with mind-matter interaction, we could probably throw that out the window. But second, I wanted to look at whether or not traumatic events might have some of the same elements as, again, you see in events that result in spontaneous mind-matter interaction. And I also wanted to consider the findings of formal phenomenological studies already published in the literature on the kinds of emotions, panic, fear, and desperation. Phenomenology is a rigorous set of techniques specifically created for studying subjective experience. So it's used a lot in psychology and sociology, things like that. It allows investigators to scientifically examine experiences and boil them down to their essential features. And I think in the past, people didn't realize how useful that could be, but that can be really useful information. And now there are so many different ways you can do phenomenology. It makes it where you can tailor the technique to what you want to study so you can best get at that experience. Now, the long, rich, and widespread history of place memory also makes it a perfect subject for phenomenology. Sorry, I need a drink of water here. Phenomenology. I'm going to go through sort of the basic framework so that you get a sense of what I'm talking about with phenomenology. But this is the Amadio-Giorgi technique, which is not used by everybody, just so you know. But every type of phenomenology starts with the same question. What is the experience of? So you can find all kinds of studies. What is the experience of loneliness? What is the experience of sadness? What is the experience of bliss? All kinds of different topics. It uses personal experience. So if you've had that experience, you can use yourself as a subject. You can also use formal interviews. You can use written depictions in the literature, like from autobiographies and things. But the richer and more detailed the description, the better. And I do recommend, if you can, to include interviews, because it allows you to have somebody to double check your work in a way. The investigator is considered a participant observer. You're not separate from what you're studying. You must alternate in his method back and forth between the rigid analytic thinking and global intuitive state. So it's sort of you're bouncing back and forth between left and right brain. The material is broken down into meaning elements or constituents, which you'll see an example of shortly. Bias is controlled two ways. One is called bracketing. That's where you write down all of your preconceptions. Literally, you make a list of all of them. And then when you're doing your analysis, you keep going back and forth to make sure you're not just writing down your preconceptions, that you're looking for, could this mean anything else? And imaginative variation is you're taking every single statement or even thought. It can be just part of a statement, an idea that's encapsulated in a few words. And you're trying to figure out how many different meanings could that have. The advantage of an interview is you can go back to the person who said that statement and you can say, which of these meanings did you actually mean? So it can be helpful to have someone you can go back to. A nonlinear description is created of the key aspects of the experience. Now, some people, they're not really talking about constituents, they're just coming up with a description of the experience. Now, one of the things I did there, and that you'll see me do again here, is I went back and I asked the experiencers to review my description to make sure it felt right and complete to them. Because sometimes they say, oh, you missed this. And you want to be able to add that in and not miss anything important. So you correct anything as needed, and you end with a final description of the experience, and that's your report. Now with mind-matter interaction phenomenology, which I think it's valuable to understand because then you'll understand what was sort of leaping out at me when I was looking at these place memory creation events. The experience changes as people gain experience and control over their mind-matter interaction. When you look at spontaneous events, like poltergeist events or just somebody who's pissed off and blowing light bulbs, it's almost always driven by very high levels of emotion. That's a real driving force. If you're looking at intentional stuff, like a healer or somebody who does this all the time, it's driven by an altered state of consciousness. And it doesn't have to be greatly altered. It's just, you sort of learn how you can shift your consciousness to get things done efficiently. The one universal in every experience I looked at was that all mind-matter interaction involved attention that's focused on something. It could be focused on an emotion. It could be focused on a person. It could be focused on the target. Didn't matter what it was focused on, but it was focused on something. So let's look at this just to kind of give you a little look at intentional mind-matter interaction. You see in the background a wood pencil that's been tied into a knot, which I got to examine. It's a real wood pencil, not a trick. The key, it seemed to me, was the altered state of consciousness. But you also had playfulness. You had suspension of the intellect. Sometimes there was dissociation. They might have been aware of feeling energized in the body. There was always focused awareness. They trusted that things would work as they should, or else they got distracted, one or the other. They were invested, and you'll see some people when they talk about place memory and other types of psi experiment that they run into problems when there's based on motivation. I found if you're overly motivated, if you want something too badly, you'll block yourself. But if you're simply invested, you know, if you've got a reason to sort of want this to end up the way, you know, that mind-matter interaction is working towards, it's actually more effective than being strongly motivated. You might have a sense of connection, sense of energy. There might be a knowing of what you need to do or what the outcome will be. There's usually an intentional mind-matter interaction. There's a conscious guiding of the process. And of course, you're open to the experience or you wouldn't be doing it in the first place. But the big key I noticed is altered state of consciousness was pretty important. Now you see a lot of arrows, and some of these arrows, the dotted ones are one way, and the double solid arrows are both ways. And that's just sort of point out that this is sort of forming a web. And what you could see was that some elements could take over for others. So if you had an altered state of consciousness that was altered enough, it might aid in dissociation. Dissociation might aid you to develop an altered state of consciousness. Playfulness and peak emotions, you can see, sort of interact with altered states of consciousness. So it creates sort of this, what some people used to call a black box, where you kind of see behind the curtain how if you don't have much of one element, another element might be able to take over and balance out to help create the experience. And if you guys don't understand that, we'll go over that more in the question section. It's different in spontaneous mind-matter interaction, of course. Altered states can happen, but most of the time, the real driving force is that peak level of emotion. And if you're emotional enough, if you've ever been really emotional, it kind of is an altered state in a way. You're still focused on something. People are usually focused on their own emotion. Generally, if you're emotional enough, the brain goes out the window. So suspension of the intellect sort of is an automatic. Openness to the experience doesn't seem to matter as much in terms of consciously, because you're not conscious of what you're doing. You're not aware you're doing it. Guiding of the process would have to be on an unconscious level. Ditto for some of these other things, distraction, release of effort. But certainly you're going to see emotion, not a lot of thinking, hopefully some kind of focus, that kind of stuff. Now, I mentioned before, I actually ran into a guy who had recorded place memory, strong place memory, without knowing what he was doing. And he was an interesting guy because he was the hotel night manager at the Waitomo Caves Hotel, which is very haunted. If you ever go to New Zealand, I recommend it. Lots of doors locking and unlocking themselves, and ghosts opening and closing doors and doing all kinds of stuff. But he actually didn't believe in ghosts. But he knew place memory existed because he'd done it. And it was during a bad divorce. He'd spent a month going up into the attic because I guess he didn't want anyone to know how unhappy he was. And he yelled and he cursed and he kicked the walls. The place was later converted into a shelter for women, but its new owner came down one morning to find the woman assigned to the attic bedroom was outside the house and refused to come back in because she couldn't sleep there because there was a man with long hair and a beard who kept yelling and cursing and kicking the walls, and she was too scared to stay in the room. She described him exactly as he was at the time of that divorce. Afterwards, he shaved his beard and stuff. People didn't know it, but it really shocked him because he had told nobody what he'd done, and he had no idea it'd gotten recorded. So when I say it's worth looking at when someone who knows they inadvertently recorded place memory, in other words, it was a spontaneous event, says of their experience and what was happening to them at the time, I'm thinking of him. So let's look what he said. He was focused on his divorce. It was like a major crash for him. He was extremely angry and emotional. He spent a month. So this was not a one-time event. This was a month of going up into the attic, where he vented by yelling, cursing, kicking the walls, very physically energized. He implied he'd lost control and neither wanted nor expected others to know about it. We see him trying to hide the skeletons in the closet. I think there was definite suspension of the intellect in this. He was out of control. And he had no idea at the time he'd created place memory. It really horrified him. So it certainly was not consciously intentional. If we look at that spontaneous matrix, what are we seeing? Well, emotion to the point where there could have been an altered state. It's hard to say. I can't go back and ask him, did he have an altered sense of time? 10 hours passed and he didn't sense it, whatever. Very little rational thought, physically energized, focused definitely on the divorce, and a lot of excess energy. Does not fill the matrix. We're only doing a little corner here. But then again, I'm not so in touch with him, so I couldn't go back and ask him to describe the experience further and see if some of these others might fill in. We can also look at the experiences of traumatic events. and whether they would be traumatic events, the kind of things that go on in a normal traumatic event would be more likely to lead to the creation of spontaneous MMI and high emotion place inner memory. But because this is a quick review of the literature and not pulled from in-depth interviews, this may miss elements that would appear in a formal study. Well, I think anyone who's been in a traumatic event will admit very high levels of emotion. There's also focused attention, whether it's on the emotion or the need to survive. There's typically fight or flight activation of the adrenal system. The intellect is generally shut down, which is why military people are trained so hard, is to try and stop that thinking rational part of you from shutting down and rational analysis going out the window. You can sort of stop that with a lot of training, but it takes a lot of formal training. Dissociation can occur due to trauma and strong emotions, especially fear. It's interesting. You will see a lot of people report dissociation. There may or may not be feelings of connection. I can't say. I know it's certainly going to be more common in groups where you have fellow soldiers or victims in the situation. I would have to probably do more in-depth interviews to find out whether it would happen on an individual level. So here we see the matrix filling in a little bit more. We still have the high levels of emotion. We have the body that's energized. We have a focused awareness, elevated awareness of the energy. They're open to anything to survive, I would say. With groups, at least you have connection, dissociation, rational thought. Now, I kind of put in desire to survive or tell others is something I think might be going on an unconscious level, but we'll talk about that more in a second. So what about the phenomenological studies already in the literature? We have a hair on fire moment here. Phenomenological studies have already been published on panic and desperation, which is something you would see in a lot of trauma situations and terrorist situations. So let's look at whether or not these experiences would be compatible with spontaneous MMI. Well, by definition, pretty much. You're talking about panic, fear, and desperation. You're going to have extremely high levels of emotion. Rational thought goes out the window. This was an interesting one I didn't expect. Emotional pain from feeling trapped and unable to escape the situation. Sometimes there's a sense or knowing of doom. They're generally living utterly in the moment. They're not wasting time thinking about the past or the future when you have, again, extreme panic, fear, and desperation. Time can slow down. Now, this is one I saw in a lot of mind-matter interaction and tends to indicate an altered state of consciousness. They can also have hyper-awareness, which I also think of as an altered state of consciousness. How would this look in the matrix? Well, here we go. Basically, it's hitting all the points that you would need to have spontaneous MMI, except we don't know if unconscious needs would be guiding the actions. Now, if you're looking at spontaneous MMI, all you need are unconscious needs. There are a lot of reports of poltergeist agents unleashing a barrage of spontaneous mind-matter interaction on the physical world to serve an unconscious need that can't otherwise be met through conventional means. So, what if place memory also serves an unconscious need? The recording of place memory through spontaneous mind-matter interaction could serve the need of victims to communicate what happened to them when it's otherwise not possible through either a more conventional means as ESP or by appearing to others as a crisis apparition. That place memory can be an effective communication tool is shown by the fact that some cold cases are solved after psychics read the place memory of what happened. So here I was thinking, I'm in good shape. I'm putting together the presentation and I realized I'd missed something huge that you could look at from an experiential viewpoint. So whoops, why didn't I think of this before? What do those who read place memory say about their experiences? And I had very little time to throw this together, so this is definitely on the crude side. But I wanted to ask, are there more than one type? If so, how do they differ? What can they say about it and how it feels to them as it was, as if it were, or bleh, as if it were created? In other words, do they have a sense of how it was created? Which I didn't particularly get. So I would encourage others to consider this might be something worth a phenomenological study. This is crude. So first of all, as somebody who is psychic myself, I spent a lot of time working with spirits, moving them on, erasing place memory. I myself only pay attention to the highly emotional stuff because that's what bothers other people. What you can do as a psychic it's sort of dependent on what's important to you. You're on an unconscious level. So to me, the energy residue from spirits feels very different from place memory. And I tune into the spirits directly or their energy fields for information. I'm not reading it from place memory. The place memory is left over from the living. It's the emotion in place memory that catches my attention first. And once I tune into it, I can pull the details out like you would recover a dream from the night before using a vivid image that you remember from it. I also think it's very easy to record over place memory using focused intent and mind-matter interaction. So I'll erase the impact of what was there before and redecorate with positive images and emotions. And but I know I'm using MMI. I know I know that experience well. I asked Deanne. She's mostly now an animal communicator, but she's a first-rate channel, and she also experiences and handles the two types of place memory differently. So for her, the place memory created through repetition of low emotion events feels very remote and removed to her, like a hologram that plays out. She doesn't have to do anything special before accessing it. It's almost like it's in a separate compartment of her nervous system, so there's no worry about cross-contamination. But place memory from high emotion or crisis events, it has a different feel to it before she even starts to access it, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's more visceral. It affects her nervous system. She grounds more in advance. She has to be more focused and present to avoid slipping into the situation or emotion that's not her. So she kind of mentally segregates it so it won't affect her or become contaminated by her own issues. But neither she nor I do a lot with place memory. There is someone who does, and that's Chris Fleming, currently on the Discovery Channel. I've known Chris for 20 years. And I got to tell you, of all the psychics I've met, he's the best I've ever seen at reading place memory. You just have to be careful that he's not sliding into retrocognition. But it's no surprise to me he had a great deal to say about it. He felt that consciousness was always involved in the creation of place memory. I asked, have you ever gone out to the desert or somewhere where there aren't any living people or animals and seen place memory? And he said he'd never seen it, not unless there's consciousness there. Place memory is constantly being recorded by the environment. He thought, so he echoed the same thing I thought, and is always present. It just has to be accessed. And it exists as layers you have to tease through. Consciousness and intent can not only let a psychic read the place memory, but also bring it to the surface and trigger it to play like plugging in a music tape. So it's both audible to others and capable of being captured on a digital recorder. He may be using MMI in this. Place memory can be influenced by the focus of those creating it. I still don't fully understand that. I did ask him to talk a little more about emotion because he said something about it I didn't understand. He said that emotion makes place memory different and stronger. He felt this was because we respond to emotion, at least most people do. We can relate to it, react to it, understand it. So it makes place memory different. He also felt that emotional place memory can catch your attention more and be easier to read if you're an emotional person and open to that emotion. If close to love, they'll have trouble picking up on it in place memory. Ditto for other emotions. And this is someone who does experiments with an audience where he'll just put random X's on a floor and then record place memory emotion on those X's. And then they'll bring in people who were segregated, didn't see what he was doing, and stand them in those positions and ask what they can feel. So he's sort of played around with that. He made a really important point that I'm still sort of mulling over, and that's that larger, in other words, mass casualty events, more emotional, dramatic, violent, aggressive, and traumatic events will stand out compared to events that are less so. Now, anybody who studied the Ganzfeld ESP test data knows that these are the exact same factors that can increase participants' ability to accurately pick up on the targets. So the question comes up, are these factors influencing how place memory is created, the ease with which it's being read, or both? So is emotion really making it get recorded more, or is it just something that makes it easier for people to pick up on it as a target? And I think that's a good question we're going to have to think more about. Since I do the phenomenological technique, I went back and I summarized what he'd said, and I sent it back to Chris and I said, am I missing something? He had 2 points. The first of which is that emotions in place memory can also affect some people's moods, feelings, and behavior over time. Kind of like collecting dirt from walking on the ground so much, like getting mud on your feet over a period of time. It can rub off on someone from repetition of being in that location. So people can get moody from absorbing the emotions floating in the place memory. I agree with this. I think you can have the same problem if people are sleeping in a haunted house, because as you're falling off to sleep, dreaming and waking up, you're going to be more psychically attuned, and you're going to be more vulnerable if you haven't protected yourself in advance from, picking up on that emotion. He also sometimes reads place memory in his body as physical sensations. And I've seen this with other psychics and even a few non-psychics. So, for example, he wanted to know how at Lizzie Borden's home, her father died. And while walking past the father's bedroom, he collapsed with chest pain, thought he was having a heart attack. The crew was about to call 911 because he was in extreme pain, feeling like his chest was exploding. A voice told him to run away. So he got up and raced out of the house, and then he was fine. So he thinks he was feeling what Andrew Borden felt when he died. His head was crushed, but his heart kept beating, and then he went into cardiac arrest. So he felt it was nothing to do with the spirit. He was feeling the death from the place memory, and his body took on the characteristics. And I have seen this with others. So my conclusions: place memory is a really fertile area for research because the phenomena is so widespread and well accepted. I also think the role of target attractiveness in place memory needs to be clarified. That could potentially be a little bit of an alternate explanation to needing spontaneous MMI to imprint. Is it that it really needs that extra oomph to imprint, or is it simply that it's such a more attractive target that people will notice the emotional place memory more? I think usually in parapsychology, the answer is both, but you don't know. Phenomenology can give us fresh insights into paranormal phenomena, and I think our way to sort of bypass some of the experimenter effect. My theory does remain possible that the ongoing resonance of living beings with their environment can create place memory that's stored on a molecular or subatomic level, and that spontaneous MMI could be involved in imprinting one-time events. By no means proven. It's still a theory, but I haven't been able to disprove it yet. And finally, we have a lot to learn. So I want to thank everyone who's borne with me. Oops, that's a mistake. And if you want more information, you can go to PamelaHeath.com. Okay.
Thank you so much.
I thank everyone who bore with that struggle to get through the PowerPoint. Sorry about that.
No, I think we were all riveted and happy to wait. It was really quite interesting. And anybody has any questions that you would like to verbally convey, or I think I don't know how good an idea it would be to turn on everybody's video, but
I would say we could probably give it a try. I think it's those video.
okay.
I think it's the video feeds from the PowerPoint that were driving it nuts. I've closed that off, so that should no longer be
Okay.
stealing bandwidth.
So if anybody wants to come on the video and ask a question, that's fine. Otherwise, otherwise you can do it audio or put it into the chat box. And Leah Sterling is saying, fantastic presentation. These slides are brilliant. And Morgan, your hand is up. So let's get in there.
Sure.
Oh yeah, first of all, absolutely awesome presentation. Like
thank you.
Like there was so many aha moments for me in this specifically.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, like seriously, like specifically the connection between like manifestation and like focus and intent, and then having that fit into the model of residual energy, like place memory. Really interesting. Yeah, so I guess like there's so much to discuss about this. But I guess my question would be, have you thought, or has there been any research done in the area of what is it that is triggering the recording of the event? Like I know I like here in Alberta, we've got a lot of geological factors that kind of play in, like we've got like quartz beds and stuff like that that are underneath, like similar to Gettysburg, and whatnot. But do we know what that is, or is it just getting recorded and we're just not picking up on it until something emotional happens and then we pick up on it?
See, that's my suspicion, and I actually think that makes more sense. If stuff is being recorded constantly, it's like this barrage of impressions. Totally. You're only going to notice something if you're either looking hard for it, you're really gifted in tuning in for that specific layer, or if there's something that comes in and just slams up the volume. So if it's recorded all the time, but that makes sense. It's not like it has to be turned on. It's just an ongoing process. It just, some things amp up the volume, and it can be affected by the geological factors as to, what's involved.
Sure.
But also in terms of emotions seem to amp it up. And then the question is do we have a gradient where we actually have, the non-emotional to the emotional, and the emotional just makes it more target attractive? Or are we having MMI that actually pumps it out there into the environment?
Yeah, because I almost wonder too, if there's like if depending on which frequency we're at personally, like whether it be
absolutely. If you're in an altered state, you're going to be able to record. I mean, it's what I do when I'm clearing. I do a lot of clearing houses. I don't get paid for it, don't advertise. I just, people find me, and I'll be having to, one of the last things you do is you clear the energy, and it can be their fear of being freaked out. It could be the original place memory from the person who lived there and recorded something really ugly that you don't want them to have to deal with, especially during the COVID lockdowns. I felt so sorry for people stuck in haunted houses. I was doing what I could. So I use mind matter interaction. I know what I'm doing. I go into an altered state. I use my focused awareness. I clear it off. So it sort of makes sense if you can use mind matter interaction to record over it, just like the living, then why wouldn't it be able to happen spontaneously if you have somebody who's dying and can't tell anyone who murdered them or whatever? It's meeting an unconscious need, just like you see unconscious needs met with poltergeist. So, and like I say, to me, that just sort of jumped out at me when I was reading the literature. It's like, why did nobody talk about this before? Because it just was so obvious. But I don't know that anyone else would have been as grounded in the mind matter interaction experience. And that's where I thank the ghost hunters for getting me to actually look at more than just mind matter interaction, because otherwise I would have never had that sort of insight and gotten interested in other things along the way. So
totally. Well,
it's great synergy to be able to work together like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up something Darcy's saying in the chat. She said she appreciates the fact that you're emphasizing the specialty level of the medium/psychic. This can't be just any sensitive to discern the subtle differences between the information received. And then she says, I've researched in an area for 5 years that's right next to a river. I don't think there's a difference that the location has a lull in the deep freezes of wintertime. What would you say to that?
I think it's only certain kinds of place memory that seem to be seasonal. And I can't tell you why, but I've heard too many stories of people who would only have experiences seeing something in fall or seeing something at a certain time of year. And it could be that part of that place memory was tied to the season in an odd way, such that that's when it plays back. It's something I've heard enough of that I'm not going to blow it off. I'm going to go, okay, that does seem to be something that can be a factor.
Right. You see that in a lot of the older cases that these things are kind of cyclical or seasonal, like you said. Lisbeth is saying, in the beginning, I had no idea what to expect from this subject. After a half an hour, a light began to shine. I never thought about this intention. Thank you so much. And then Jane Anderson said,
yeah, Morgan, by the way, I saw your little pop-up. Yes, I agree with you. Go on.
I have to go read it. Jane Anderson said on the battleship that we recorded sounds of 16-inch guns, 16-inch guns firing. It was on an anniversary date of the bombardment of Okinawa in Japan.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And Darcy is saying the location gets fewer visitors, but she thinks it might be more of an impact of that than there must be something else that's more of an impact than the freeze. Darcy, if you want to pop in and help me garble myself.
It's an interesting thing because how much of it could also be the people who are there interested in knowing and unconsciously using their MMI to help pull this place memory to where it's audible, because Chris did say he can make it audible. He can do it. He can pull up place memory so other people can hear it with their ears and you can record it. And my guess is he's using mind matter interaction to do that, which means other people can do that too. It just might be spontaneous and unconscious, because most people don't want to or don't realize how much mind matter interaction they're doing. When I was doing my study, I interviewed 8 people. I left out my own experiences because I'd had mine before I got into this. And some of them would start off by saying, oh, I only do ESP. I'm like, okay, well, talk to me. Tell me about your experiences anyway. They all did MMI. They didn't recognize it. And these were sophisticated people who should have known. But it's an interesting thing with the conscious mind that a lot of times you just sort of blow it off or you don't think about it. I mean, it's not always like I had a friend, we were eating, a friend I was visiting in New Zealand. I have a lot of New Zealand experiences, and she stabbed her fork into the spaghetti and it melted on her. The fork did.
Oh my gosh.
All over the place because she was emotional about the trip was over and she'd had a good time. And so a lot of people can do it. It's just a lot of people, you'll blow it off or you'll write it off to something else and you don't realize what you've done. It's that whole witness inhibition kind of thing that Kenneth Batchelor talked about. It's a very useful topic. So you see that a lot with MMI. And people will, I think everyone is psychic. Everyone has MMI abilities. How you use it is going to depend on what's important to your unconscious mind, and whether you're aware of it is going to depend on a lot of things. How open you are, whether you really think about it, that kind of stuff.
I have been learning in this course that I've had all these like one-off kind of experiences, and when I was 16 or 18, I had at 16 and at 18, I spent part of the summer in Aberdeenshire in Scotland with close friends. And we went both times to the Slains Castle, which is a ruin and is in the process of falling off the cliff in the Bullersebuchen. And the second time that I was there, I had started reading all the literature, and I put my hand on the stone wall as I was walking down one of the corridors, and I had this it was in my head. It wasn't external, but I heard sounds. I heard glasses clinking. I heard, knives and spoons and things, people talking. And I felt like I was a serving girl from the kitchen, because all of a sudden I had the other hand up and I felt like I had a tray with stuff on it that I was taking.
Right.
And it scared the shit out of me. and I opened my eyes, of course, assuming I was going to hear something around the area, because people would,
Yeah.
picnic around the castle and all that stuff. And it was absolutely silent. And it took
Yeah.
me, I'm not sure I even told my friend in Scotland about it at the time. It took me a number of years to actually mention it to anybody, and then it kind of went away.
Well, see,
But
it could be
while
a
you were
past
talking,
life
it came
memory.
back.
It could
Well,
really be a
that
past
was
life memory.
what
It
I
could
thought at the
also
beginning.
be, if this is held in the physical structure of molecules, and you're open to reading that physical structure, if you're opening up and you're touching the stone, you're saying, play this back for me,
Show me
the
something.
resonance.
Yeah.
I don't know why
Yeah.
you wouldn't be able to record it. I mean, that's what makes this kind of interesting, because we're talking about a phenomena that's been considered psychic, that's extremely widespread and accepted. And if we can prove its reality, it's a nose, camel's nose under the tent, so to speak, of helping
Yeah.
people realize there may be physical stuff going on other people can explore. So I
Can
really
pick
would
up.
like to see people exploring place memory more. I think it's kind of an exciting field that's been ignored for a few years. But do go back and read all the literature. I know I tried to summarize it, but it's really fun to read the literature for yourself in the online library.
I'm sitting here with Ian Stevenson's present to Carlos of a complete set of the journals and proceedings of the Society for Psychical Research and of the American Society for Psychical Research. And it's like, oh my God, I'm going to have to live to be 125 to actually go through all this stuff, but it's really wonderful.
This is why you do the text searchable feature of the online library. But
like sign, right?
My early warning was, be aware terms have changed in meaning. So if you're looking at place memory, be aware you need to be paying attention to who's saying it and what they meant by that term at that time, because it's changed a lot. And it does drive me nuts. It's a personal pet peeve that people don't know the literature enough. They're interested in their own little section, but they haven't read the others. And so they reinvent the wheel. And you see this in the ghost hunters, and it just drives me nuts.
And in the parapsychologists as well.
Yeah, there's the passion, there's the energy, there's the drive, and I'd love to see them breaking new ground, because we make so little progress in this field because we don't know what's been done and failed before.
Well, and we don't have the numbers. Morgan, you got your hand up again?
Yeah, no, I was just going to interject with the PK side of it that we were just talking about, because I think where the study could focus or could go is where you've got people that are like, if this is somewhat rooted in psychokinesis, and we're putting that out there, we're like putting these images and memories and so on and so forth out there, is the bias of people, right, that are coming in and reading it, and then the belief system that gets layered. Because what I've noticed is, like you guys were talking about the ghost hunter side of it, is exactly that, where you get these these old ideas or these old superstitions and so on and so forth, and then that gets kind of layered in there. And so that could be a sort of a sticky spot to unwind, now that we've sort of got all of these different.
But that's the advantage of knowing the history, because you can say,
for sure,
yes, we did think that too. And if you look at so-and-so, he described it the exact same way you are.
Yeah.
We were thinking that, but then we realized this. And then we shifted to this. So it's your way of easing them forward to where we think now. But you have to know the literature to know it. You have to know the older terms.
Absolutely.
You have to know the older ideas. You have to understand why they changed. I mean, it's why I keep saying mind-matter interaction, because I used PK a lot before, but it's limited because it's implying movement. And so much of this phenomena does not involve movement. And if you're not careful, you will sabotage yourself on an unconscious level, because you're not going to see something that is MMI, because it doesn't have
Yeah, you're putting it in a box,
characteristics
like it
you're
all ends up sort of
expecting.
Yeah,
labeled in a
yeah.
Yeah, I
box.
hate
Yeah,
that
it
term
makes total
MMI though.
sense.
We need a shorter 2-syllable description, but I don't have one. Sorry.
Well, I just wanted to say that I think Darcy put it really well when we were talking about how people feel something or get something out of the environment, and you had started to talk about who's there and who's able to interact with the place memory. And Darcy said, "Yep, spin the roulette wheel on the caliber of the visitor." So I think that's a really good way to say, sometimes we're getting more because the people that are around are getting more, and sometimes we don't have that. The other thing was, Leah said, I'm interested in the emotional side. Some emotional and physical feelings are perceived in areas of the brain outside the sensory area, the insular cortex. I wonder if these areas might also be in play.
Yeah, the problem would be trying to do an fMRI when they're doing it, because
Oh,
the noise of the machine and everything, it's going to be hard to focus. And I don't know, I mean, I had talked to somebody years ago who had access to an fMRI about looking at the different aspects of the brain that are active, but you still run into the problem of the experimenter effect. So is it really, is the result you get really what the machine is showing, or are you changing what the screen shows with MMI?
yeah.
And I know I do
Yeah.
MMI. I blow light bulbs if I'm angry. I mean, I know what I can do. So for me, I like phenomenology, especially for the others of you. If you know you can do MMI and you're worried about the experimenter effect, that's the nice thing about experiential research. It's recognizing, yeah, you're going to be part of this experiment. We'll try to control for bias, but there's not an easy way to use MMI to give a different result than what you're going to find, especially if you're looking at autobiographies or things that are already written, or you're doing interviews. You're less apt to be putting words in people's mouths, that kind of thing. I think it's something that we haven't really looked at because it's sort of the soft science research. But it's something that we ought to consider, especially as there are so many different types of phenomenology now that would be worth exploring, and see, once you figure out what you want to explore the experience of, then you can say, okay, these are the different types, which would get most at whatever I'm interested in learning. And this is a formal kind of a study that gets us away from statistics and away from some of the MMI related experimenter effects.
Yeah. Darcy is saying, yes, Pam, you're aware of your impact on the environment. Not everyone is. I find a lot of my clients have unregistered psychic ability. And I think
I saw that too, interviewing people, or just talking to people. They've had experiences and yet they don't acknowledge to themselves what it means. You blow enough light bulbs in a row, you'll figure it out. I'll tell you that.
Right. Right, exactly. Well, I had a friend at Duke who had a friend who would talk about how it was really odd that, the light bulbs blew when she was angry, and didn't really talk about, maybe she had some ability there. And then they all took a jaunt from North Carolina to go up to Gettysburg. And when they went down that one road where everybody was, killed and inundated and there was fire and all this kind of stuff, it was just a really horrific, and I can't think of the name of that road, part of the battlefield at Gettysburg. They had to literally carry her out of there. It just hit her like a ton of bricks. And later on, he was talking to her, talking about her having finally thought, oh my God, there's something else going on here too with me. There's something that I have, that I'm getting this information and putting that emotion out into the area. So
yeah, and sometimes if they go back to their families, they'll find out there was someone else in their family that was really psychic that nobody mentioned to them before. It's like I have my mother's father was a famous lay healer. He could do the laying on of hands, heal people, and doctors would go for miles around it, unable to figure out why he could do this, because it just freaked him out. And My mom never mentioned it to me till after I had found my own healing abilities. I was like, Mom, I have to mention something because I was already a doctor. It's like kind of embarrassing. She's, oh yes, it's in the family. Like, but they don't mention it to you. So the same thing could be true for her. And sometimes it
Yeah.
can actually be a way to sort of bond with other family members
Mm-hmm.
and feel more part of your own family, part of the group.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, I recently found out that I have DNA that goes right through Aberdeenshire. So maybe I should look at some of those folks and see what they were like. Darcy saying, Pam, exactly. Memory of family history is so very important. My grandmother finally mentioned it right before she died because she knew I taught. So yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how family will keep it hidden, like it's something to
And
be ashamed of.
yeah, it's actually, yeah, it's very interesting what kinds of things people hide too that are like, what do you mean? That's wonderful. Why didn't you tell us about that?
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if you've seen Sherry Simmons's second sight stuff. I think it was mostly published in the JSPR because she did a phenomenological interview kind of thing in the 90s around the Highlands of Scotland with the men that were noted to have second sight, and she was trying really hard to put together kind of a genealogical and working as a genetic, like a geneticist would do, trying to make this kind of how far back can we go on your tree and find more people with second sight and what were their experiences and so on. And she spent a lot of time at Scottish Studies, and I don't know if she's retired yet, but some of her work was just really interesting, and she had quite a lot of interviews and was doing something that was unusual in the 90s. People were at the Edinburgh group, Phenomenology was not,
No, it wasn't anywhere. I was the first to do it, I
right.
think, where I was.
Yeah. And she was the first to do it there. And she actually, I think when she found a home with Scottish Studies, because they're so interested in the oral history, it became less of an odd thing, right? But in the psychology department, it was like, what are you doing? That kind
But
of
you'd
thing.
also have to look at, if you look at Ian Stevenson's work on reincarnation, it sort of won me over. You'd want to look not only at genetics, but soul past lives. Have you had a lot of soul past lives where you were dealing with this, where your soul might have more experience at communicating to the unconscious mind, which communicates to the conscious mind, that kind of thing. I don't know, just throwing it out there. I know no way to study that.
Door might be more open. Leah is saying studies on the insula cortex is an area of neuroscience where they have used interviews rather than just fMRI. Not sure if anyone has ever done proper phenomenological studies though, but that would be interesting.
Go for it.
Yeah, Leah.
I did find that Phenomenology. I actually talked to the author, the one who did the Panic, Fear, and Desperation, because he used such a different technique. It was like trying to talk in different languages, French and German, and communicate. But it did look like it totally fit with spontaneous MMI, that it would potentially be the kind of experience where you're feeling those emotions. It would be the kind of experience. It would be very promoting, really encourage spontaneous MMI if you had that ability and you didn't have other ways to get your needs met. But it would really be interesting to see more people do phenomenological studies. Another one I've asked people to do for years is ESP, because when I looked somewhat informally, because people kept giving me ESP experiences when I was looking at MMI, so I ended up with sets of both, and I could not tell the difference between the two. When you broke them down in terms of constituents, and we're always saying, is it ESP or is it MMI or is it psi? And my thought is it's psi, that ESP and MMI are really two parts of the same elephant, and that's where an understanding of phenomenology and experiences is helpful, because recognizing that you have the exact same experiences when you're naming things two different things, this might be the same thing. If it's the exact same experience, you can't tell anything different between them. then why are you giving it two names? And it's sort of like with the place memory, when I was reading it, everyone talked about, oh yeah, this is just, it can be this or it can be this. And I was like, wait, these are very different experiences. What does this mean? So that's where I think a basic understanding of phenomenology and the value of an experience can help out.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's happening more and more over in the UK for sure. If you were to, make a plea to Chris Rowe to talk to his folks, because there's a lot of phenomenology going on over there, but it's IPA. It's a different type of, it's a different type of methodology, but all of those methodologies are
There's a lot of
useful.
methodology. So that's a trick, is to
Yeah.
sort of look at all the methodologies and see which one is best suited for what you want to study.
Yeah, exactly.
That'd be what I'd say.
Any more comments or
Gracias, Angel.
uh-huh. I agree. Joke to me, and I think it's wonderful. I think everybody is very happy with this, and it's the thing that I love about this is a really, it not only tied your presented Bill Roll's ideas, and then Persinger and his colleague, but it is, so you were tying yourself there, but you were also tying yourself to the older depictions of these types of things. And it's the first time that I've really heard something that showed an enormous amount of attention to the features of each of these two these two categories, to the extent of being able to kind of move them away slightly and start thinking about what's different here. What is different from the nuns and wherever that are constantly seen in the cloister walking to prayers, and to these other kinds of things that are very emotional experiences. So I think that's wonderful to see that level of analysis, and we certainly need that. I think Carlos would be doing another jig today, because he had, it's hitting two of his favorite things, figuring out how to get people to pay attention to the historical work in the field and what's available there, even if it's not experimental. And certainly there's an awful lot of spontaneous stuff when you go back to the 1880s and so on, that's really important. And then small, here and there, somebody writing an article or making a presentation at the Royal Society 100 years before that, or 100 years before that. So that's wonderful. And then the other part of it is that you're getting into the meat of spontaneous cases. It's no longer, oh golly gosh, this is what we used to do, and now we can derive experimental work out of that. No, this is a mother lode of information that is so important to really look at in a deep way.
So, if you look at well, you come from somebody who's looked at poltergeist from 4000 BC to the current era, and the only thing that changes is whether you're throwing feces or frying computers. Okay.
Yeah.
But everything else is the same. So it's the same with place memory. When you're looking back, they're describing experiences that sound totally familiar. You could write that same experience today and you would recognize it. So it's important to look into the past. We have this continuity. They had thoughts about it. Now, I do recommend, reading how that evolved, because it helps you keep from falling the same false trails that they already went down. But yeah, no, we're connected to the past, and in the beginning, a lot of them were simply ghost hunters or story writers or that kind of thing. It's part of our culture and history. And I don't think that we should be ashamed of that. We should take advantage of it.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. Well, anybody else have anything to say? Leah is saying that she agrees this really satisfies her analytical brain. And Lizbeth is saying, I love your conversation. It's very interesting. This is, oh boy.
Well, I love questions. Give me questions.
Yeah, anybody got more questions?
it's going through so much stuff, and those experiences are complex, but like I say, I'm so grounded in them. It's sort of like second nature to me, and it's easy to confuse people or to go too fast. But it was sort of interesting. The closer you got to a formal phenomenological study, which would have really asked the in-depth questions and done a good interview, the closer it got to exactly matching a spontaneous MMI kind of thing. The only thing that kind of stood out was a bit about the fear. That was kind of interesting, or feeling trapped, which would potentially add even more to the MMI need, you know. But it was really interesting. It just basically filled in the whole map. I was like, holy cow.
Well, and Darcy's also saying thank you for including us field experiencers and field investigators too. Yeah, it's wonderful to see that.
Well, some of us know that I led a little talk on trying to do outreach with ghost hunters, because I think it's such a potentially enriching experience for both sides. You can trigger curiosity. You can bring up questions we might not have thought of. We can bring up ideas that you might not have thought of to enrich. We can enrich each other so much. And I would dearly love to see more ghost hunters involved in parapsychology and more parapsychologists involved in ghost hunter conventions and things, because it really did drive me nuts that I was hearing so many speakers at those meetings. They weren't trying to lie. They just didn't know the research, and they were telling people we didn't have answers when we did. And that doesn't help. That doesn't help anyone. So we need to have more togetherness, more interaction.
Yeah, there needs to be more communication, because one of the things that bothers me is when, and I think Carlos felt that way too, was that when you would talk to researchers on the scientific side, they weren't interested in hearing or listening or finding out what was going on. And that's really important. Being able to get to that, not only investigator experience, but the individual, a psychic practitioner or a field investigator, everybody's got something to say. I think we were discussing in our discussion over the weekend, which is not going up on YouTube. It's going to be a private thing for everybody who's registered. We were talking about Rob Tilley's kind of muscular way of haunt clearing, and how much experience he has, and how much he understands, and how much is he has a perspective and all that. And what we've been learning from a lot of other people, and then from you as well, that there's all this information that the scientific side of the field ignore, because it's coming from a set of experimenters that aren't in the same club, and that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
If we're all interested, and everybody's got something to say.
I saw someone posted they'd like to see more people talk at events. We just have to be invited. There are a lot of parapsychologists who, like me, adore going to these events. I'm happy to talk anytime, because I've done a lot of work on the ways ghosts can get stuck and how to get them to move forward, different things. But I have to say, since COVID, nobody's asked. I haven't been asked to any, and usually they go for TV celebrities, because they think it'll draw more people.
Well, right. They have to cover their expenses too, but it's that whole other possible conversation could be so good for everybody, to listen to each other and draw all the insights that come from different points of view. I think that's really important. That's Morgan is saying, that's why I'm trying to bring my live shows to the States right now, for the exact reason. And Elizabeth is saying, I'm going to read and visit your website. I have a lot Brian, there. Yeah, I had Brian put that in the chat. I have it in the chat, and I have links to your books in the chat as well, and those will go into the description under the video.
Yeah, my PDF gallery has a lot more formal articles that everything is free to download. I don't have any advertising on my site, and the FAQs were based on the questions I got asked a lot, either by email or at ghost hunter conventions. So it really is oriented to be very friendly to all audiences, hopefully.
Great.
I put a lot of work into that website. So hopefully you can find use in it.
I can relate because I'm failing at my website at the moment, so that's why everybody's getting a newsletter. So I really relate. But I'm probably what I'll do, and I'll have Brian do too after he's done with his talk, is like go through and see what specific links we can also put into the description. And once I get everything up there, I'm going to have everybody take a look at their descriptions and see what else I can put in there. They're getting a lot of playing on the Parapsychology Foundation website and in the first 24 hours. But, you know, they have the amount of videos that when I go back, there's another 200 and another 200 to see who's seeing things on there, that if we come back with more information for the descriptions, I think we'll be doing a lot of good for everybody that's interested in the area. So Pam, I just want to tell you it's wonderful. I knew I was gonna love this one when Brian was explaining it to me, and I just think it's absolutely wonderful. I thank you so much for coming and doing this talk. It's just terrific.
And I'll try to make Brian's talk. I have a competing Zoom call, but I will try to make it as quick as I can onto your, or as long as I can onto your call.
We'd love to have you, but not to worry, there'll be a video. That was the thing that motivated us to do this. Carlos, when back in the day, he did this marvelous talk for our last thing in 2020, and they lost the recording. I don't think they did it on purpose, but something happened at the beginning with the recording, and we didn't have it. And then it was kind of like, okay, we've got to do this as a topic so that we've got everything. And so far we're doing pretty well with that. So, well, thank you so much. I'm going to pull up just a little bit to tell them. Let me see. Let me get it back up again, and we'll just pull up his slides so I can just tell everybody what time it is.
Mm-hmm.
No, and I didn't. Oh, am I sharing? Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I just have to get the chat and all that out of the way. So Brian is going to be talking tomorrow at 3 p.m. Central again, and it will be making a case for considering place memory. So I hope that you can all join us, and if not, it should be up and out quite soon. Lloyd's is absolutely ready to go up on the PF. I'm gonna get it started, getting uploaded now, and I've got Allison's in the can too, so we'll be trying to get that one up later today. And probably I'll wait a couple of days to do the private one because it's going to take a little bit of editing. But these three should be up there very soon, and I'll put out another list to everybody so that they know where the videos are. But thank you again, Pamela. It was just wonderful, just wonderful.
Thank you. And, good night, all.
Yes, Alex is saying good night from Athens, and
yeah.
Have a good evening, everybody.